And we are back for prepping for winter with the conclusion of the first Arianna sample chapter. Arianna has left on a mission to meet Aegon in a quest that mirrors Quentin's quest to meet Dany. Arianna's posse has stopped at Ghost Hill, where they have learned of Doran's resistance against the Targaryens, and now Arianna is contemplating family and her obligation or lack of obligation to it. And now let's continue. In his youth, her uncle Oberyn had fought a duel with Edgar, had given him a wound that mortified and killed him. Afterward, men called him the Red Viper, and spoke of poison on his blade. The Ironwoods were an ancient house, proud and powerful. Before the coming of the Rhoynar, they had been kings over half of Dorne, with domains that dwarfed those of House Martell. Blood feud and rebellion would surely have followed Lord Edgar's death, had not her father acted at once. The Red Viper went to Oldtown, thence across the narrow sea to Lys, though none dared call it exile. And in due time, Quentin was given to Lord Anders to foster as a sign of trust. And now we get a bit more on the Martell-Ironwood feud. Here we find out that the Ironwoods were once the dominant house in Dorne and were supplanted by the Martells, so there's likely some resentment there. We also know that the Ironwoods are ethnically different from the Martells, with the Ironwoods being stony Dornish and the Martells being salty Dornish. On top of this, Arianna tells us in the Soiled Knight chapter that the Ironwoods aren't a fan of Dornish law and favor patrilineal succession. Not to mention the Ironwoods fought against the Martells in 3 Blackfire rebellions. And, more recently, Oberyn killed Edgar Ironwood in a duel and was exiled. Upon his return, Quentin was taken as a ward. So the Martells and the Ironwoods have a fairly active, 1,000-year-old brutal feud that involves history, economics, ethnicity, law, and personal vendettas. The two houses are absolutely at odds, and yet Doran puts the Ironwoods in charge of the Quentin quest. Doran seems intent on sabotaging his own plans. Now we should talk a bit about Oberyn's duel. We know from Tyrion that Oberyn was about 15 or 16 when he was found abed with Edgar Ironwood's paramour. Again, we are talking about the age of Elia Sand, Lyanna at Harrenhal, and Arianna when she lost her virginity to Daemon Sand. Yes, we're talking about Oberyn Martell, and yes, he has already fathered a bastard, but he's also still a child. In fact, the duel between Edgar and Oberyn was purposely only to first blood because Oberyn was a child. Now, Edgar Ironwood was the grandfather of Anders Ironwood, and Anders Ironwood is old enough to have grandchildren himself. So even assuming something really low like 20-year generations, Edgar would be at least in his 80s if he remained alive, while Oberyn would only be about 42 or 43. That means Edgar Ironwood was likely 40 or 50 years older than Oberyn, possibly more. And now let's think about Edgar Ironwood's paramour. Was she of an age with Edgar and in her 50s or 60s at the time of the duel? Or was she of an age with Oberyn and a teenager at the time of the duel? Or was she somewhere in between? No matter the scenario, we have a situation where an adult is having sex with a child. That helped heal the breach between Sunspear and the Ironwoods, but it had opened new ones between Quentin and the Sand Snakes. And Arianna had always been closer to her cousins than to her distant brother. "We are still the same blood, though," she whispered. "Of course I want my brother home. I do." The wind off the sea was raising goose prickles all up and down her arms. Arianna pulled her cloak up about herself and went off to seek her bed. So we find that Arianna is bringing up the Ironwood-Martell feud within the context of Quentin. On top of the sibling rivalry, and on top of the feudalistic antagonism between Quentin and Arianna, Arianna is essentially labeling Quentin as an Ironwood. And she had done this in the Soiled Knight chapter as well. In Arianna's mind, the Martell-Ironwood feud is the Arianna-Quentin feud. Now what's interesting is that in Quentin's mind, we don't have any evidence of this feud, whether sibling or family. Quentin thinks about Arianna only once, and it's when he considers her scorn if he fails on his quest to get a dragon. He never thinks about ruling Dorne, or the Ironwood-Martell feud, or Dornish law, or Blackfire rebellions, or sexism. But the most notable thing here is that Arianna is affirming her love for Quentin because they are the same blood. And this is despite the fact that she just called Quentin a stranger. This is quite glaringly the inverse of the argument she just gave for Aegon. Aegon is a stranger despite having the same blood. Really, at the end of the day, Quentin and Aegon are the same. They share the same blood with Arianna, but are strangers. Now it should be noted that a wind comes off the ocean as Arianna is staring out at the sea and moon, and this parallels the wind blowing with Theon as he stands in front of a weirwood at Winterfell. Their ship was called the Peregrine. They sailed upon the morning tide. The gods were good to them, the sea calm. Even with good winds, the crossing took a day and a night. Jane Ladybright grew greensick and spent most of the voyage spewing, which Elia Sand seemed to find hilarious. "Someone needs to spank that child," Joss Hood was heard to say, but Elia was amongst those who heard him say it. "I'm almost a woman grown, sir," she responded haughtily. "I'll let you spank me, though, but first you'll need to tilt with me and knock me off my horse." So here once again, the Arianna quest is mirrored to the Quentin quest. Jane Ladybright aboard the Peregrine has now taken the role of Archibald Ironwood on the Meadowlark and has become greensick. Now yet again we are faced with a creepy situation of an adult being sexual with a child, this time a 14-year-old girl. This scene is charged with sexual innuendo and is very much in contrast to what we talked about earlier with Arianna and Damon's sexual relationship. Arianna and Damon were young, but they were of an age. There was no power imbalance as both were children. This allowed their sexual relationship to be sweet and romantic in Arianna's mind. This exchange between Joss Hood and Elia Sand is quite the opposite. There is nothing sweet or romantic about adults having sex with children. Certainly not with Oberyn Martell, and certainly not here. This is all important as remember, Elia Sand is a stand-in for Lyanna Stark. She is the same age, wild, half a horse, a jouster, and a werewood. We have been beat over the head with parallels between Lyanna Stark and Elia Sand, and then we are very deliberately exposed to the creepiness of sex between an adult and a child. I bring all of this up because Rhaegar Targaryen was an adult at Harrenhal. He was 22 or 23 years old, while Lyanna Stark was a child. She was 14. We do not know exactly what happened between Rhaegar and Lyanna, but whatever it was not sweet and it was not romantic because Rhaegar was an adult and Lyanna a child. That said, there is another side to this. Oberyn, of course, proved himself quite risque and quite dangerous for his age. He was grossly underestimated. Elia here responds to Joss Hood's threat of a spanking with a much more salacious statement. She asks him to tilt with her and knock her off her horse. To tilt is to drive at someone with a lance, and to knock someone off their horse is to humble them. Elia essentially tells Joss Hood that she wants him to fuck her and put her in her place. And so our author has introduced an interesting dichotomy here. On the one hand, he introduces a creepy notion of adults having sex with children, but on the other hand, he introduces the idea that children shouldn't be underestimated in their knowledge and experience. This is all very important as it conflicts with the ideas that people have about Lyanna Stark's relationship with Rhaegar. In the story, there seems to be two narratives about the relationship. There is the first, that Lyanna is a helpless damsel in distress kidnapped by Rhaegar who needs to be rescued. And then there's the second, that Lyanna and Rhaegar were star-crossed lovers and Rhaegar was protecting his lady. Neither of these stories really sits right. If Lyanna is like Elia Sand, or Arya, or Asha, or Ygritte, she is more of the self-reliant type. She is no princess in the tower awaiting a valiant knight to rescue her. But at the same time, the age difference between Lyanna and Rhaegar makes the star-crossed lover's tale seem off. Not to mention, Lyanna needing Rhaegar's protection doesn't seem right either. I do wonder if we should be looking for a new narrative on what happened. How would Elia Sand act? What would Elia Sand do? Shouldn't Lyanna be the strong and defiant young woman and not the damsel? I put forward the idea that perhaps Lyanna was the one manipulating Rhaegar. "We are on a ship, and without horses," Joss replied. "And ladies do not joust," insisted Garibald Shells, a far more serious and proper young man than his companion. "I do. I'm Lady Lance." Arianna had heard enough. "You may be a lance, but you are no lady. Go below and stay there till we reach land." So Elia Sand's sexual innuendo goes right over Garibald and Joss's heads. Arianna, though, gets it and sends Elia away. Now once again the nickname Lady Lance is brought up. Now I should mention that our author does like to use the term lady as a representation of traditional femininity and then contrasts it with other terms like Nymeria, that is, the feminist warrior queen. For example, quite heavy-handedly, Lady is the direwolf of Sansa, the traditional girl, while Nymeria is the direwolf of Arya, the non-traditional feminist girl. Lady Nym dresses as a traditional woman, but secretly hides daggers and is sexually liberated because she is a non-traditional woman. In the same vein, Lady Lance is simply bringing up these two opposing roles for women, traditional versus non-traditional. Elia is clearly a non-traditional girl, and try as people like, she cannot be forced into the traditional role. And again, we should rethink the ideas we have about Lyanna's kidnapping and death. These stories so clearly force Lyanna into the traditional role, when we know she was a non-traditional girl. Elsewise, the crossing was uneventful. At dusk, they spied a galley in the distance, her oars rising and falling against the evening stars. But she was moving away from them, and soon dwindled and was gone. Arianna played a game of Cyvasse with Sir Damon, and another with Garibald Shells, and somehow managed to lose both. Sir Garibald was kind enough to say she played a gallant game, but Damon mocked her. "You have other pieces besides the dragon, princess. Try moving them sometime." So Arianna sees a galley in the Sea of Dorn, but it's hard to say who it belongs to. It's heading towards the stars at dusk, meaning it's probably heading east out of the Sea of Dorn. The ship could be coming from anywhere: the Tor, Stonehelm, Ironwood. It might be a Volantene ship dropping off the Golden Company. We have no idea, but I do think it would be interesting if the ship was coming from Gaston Grey. Perhaps it's a ship bringing Dre or Garen from prison to exile. Now Arianna plays some Cyvasse and loses both games. Cyvasse is an obvious metaphor for the Game of Thrones, so we see that she is still not in the right mindset. The most interesting statement about the game she plays is that Garibald Shells says she played a gallant game. A gallant game, though, is not a winning game, as Ned Stark learned. Now Damon mocks Arianna for focusing only on the dragon in her game. This does seem to be in reference to Doran Martell's purported plan of having Quentin bring back a dragon. Of course, a Cyvasse player would know that a complete strategy includes more than just a dragon. Otherwise, it's a losing strategy. Damon is essentially telling us that there must be more to Doran's plans. I like the dragon. She wanted to slap the smile off his face, or kiss it off perhaps. The man was as smug as he was comely. Of all the knights in Dorne, why did my father choose this one to be my shield? He knows our history. It is just a game. Tell me of Prince Viserys. The Beggar King? Sir Damon seemed surprised. Everyone says that Prince Rhaegar was beautiful. Was Viserys beautiful as well? I suppose. He was a Targaryen. I never saw the man. So Arianna straight up asks why Doran would put Daemon Sand on her quest. We talked about this quite a bit in part 1. Not only has he been a big distraction for Arianna, but he's also been trying to undermine the reputation of Jonqon and Aegon the entire time. Daemon's presence certainly makes it look like Doran wants this mission to fail. Now once again we are brought back to the subject of Arianna's type, as she asks for a physical description of Viserys. We actually don't have much idea if Viserys was physically attractive or not. We know he had silver hair, lilac eyes, and looked gaunt. It's unclear if Arianna likes Valyrian features or not, which is going to be a huge aspect of her meeting Aegon. Darkstar looked Valyrian, and Arianna certainly liked him, but Arianna is also horrified by the looks of Lysono Mar. It's likely that what Arianna finds attractive is not really in the physical. When it comes down to it, Darkstar, Daemon, and Oberyn all look different, but are of a similar character. They are macho, arrogant assholes, hard and cruel, dark and dangerous. Viserys may have been hard and cruel, but he certainly wasn't very dark or dangerous. Dany thinks him nervous, weak, and frightened. Now interestingly, Daemon uses the derogatory name for Viserys, the Beggar King. This is striking as Oberyn, the man Daemon squired for, once supposedly tried to raise Doran for Viserys, and Doran's whole supposed plan for revenge was based on Viserys' return. Daemon Sand quite concisely highlights the problem with Doran's supposed plan. You don't put the fate of Dorne in the hands of a Beggar King. The secret pact that Prince Doran had made all those years called for Arianna to be wed to Prince Viserys, not Quentin to Daenerys. It had all come undone on the Dothraki Sea when he was murdered, crowned with a pot of molten gold. He was killed by a Dothraki Khal, said Arianna, the Dragon Queen's own husband. So right after Daemon Sand highlights the fundamental problem with Doran's Viserys plan, we are presented with the fundamental problem with Doran's Daenerys plan. The supposed secret pact is not about Quentin and Dany, it's about Arianna and Viserys. This is a problem that's so glaring that even Barristan catches it and berates Quentin with it. The marriage pact has no force, he says. And this is ignoring the fact that the marriage pact was arranged by men who have no authority to arrange marriage pacts, only lords can do this, and the fact that all of the witnesses of the pact are dead. When it comes down to it, Doran's plan A was ridiculous, and his plan B was even worse, and our author is reminding us again of this right here. So I've heard, what of it? Just, why did Daenerys let it happen? Viserys was her brother, all that remained of her own blood. The Dothraki are a savage folk. Who can know why they kill? Perhaps Viserys wiped his arse with the wrong hand. Perhaps, thought Arianna, or perhaps Daenerys realized that once her brother was crowned and wed to me, she would be doomed to spend the rest of her life sleeping in a tent and smelling like a horse. Now there is some mystery that still remains around Viserys' death and who is responsible. Viserys, of course, was stupid, but it also seems that he was fed misinformation that he would be safe in Vastoth Rock when it was common knowledge that strangulation was a perfectly acceptable way of killing people there. I do wonder what on earth Jorah was telling Viserys around this time, and we should never forget that Dany commanded Jorah to tell Viserys that the dragon eggs were his. This is a command that Jorah doesn't seem to have delivered, and yet Jorah does go and translate all of Khal Drogo's insults, allowing the whole situation to escalate. So while there's plenty of blame to put at Viserys, Khal Drogo, and Jorah's feet, Dany is mostly innocent of her brother's death. Arianna, though, jumps to the conclusion that there was a sibling rivalry going on. She assumes Dany was jealous of her brother in the same way that she is jealous of Quentin. Of course, this isn't the case at all. Dany fully recognized that Viserys was king, wanted him to have the eggs, and only wanted a simple life for herself. But this gets to the most fascinating part of this passage. Arianna doesn't know that Viserys and Dany were kept in the dark about the pact. Quentin was well aware of this fact, but Doran seems to have kept this rather vital information from Arianna. And because he did, it's allowed Arianna to suspect Dany as a murderer of Viserys. She is the Mad King's daughter, the princess said. How do we know? We cannot know, Sir Daemon said. We can only hope. And finally, we are left with another glaring weakness of Doran's Plan A and Plan B. Viserys and Dany are known to be the Mad King's children. There is a famously high probability of them being insane. Why would anyone put all of their eggs in these baskets? In nearly every way, Doran's supposed plans are ridiculous, which our author reminds us of over and over. Unless Doran is crazy or stupid, there absolutely must be more to Doran's plans. And our chapter ends with a little bit of ambiguity. Is Daemon hoping for Dany to be sane or insane? If the Dornish truly want to align with Dany, sanity is desired. If they want Aegon and Dany to kill each other and kill all of their enemies, then perhaps they're hoping for insanity. Which brings us to the end of Arianna I. Overall, this chapter seems to have been mostly about mirroring Arianna's journey to Quentin's. Armed with letters, companions, and the words of their father, the Martell children are sent off to treat with Targaryens. And both quests seem to have some serious problems with them, Quentin's being the glaring weakness of the marriage pact, and the Ironwood control of the quest, and Arianna's being her lack of loyalty to family she doesn't know, along with her disruptive companions, Daemon Sand and Elia Sand. It's difficult to imagine that Doran would expect either quest to be successful, and the chapter gives ample time explaining why perhaps Doran would not even want either quest to be successful. Our visit to Ghost Hill reminds us that the Dornish and the Rhoynar have a bad history with the Targaryens, the Valyrians, and dragons. But the Dornish are able to defend against dragons and are able to kill them. The chapter also spends a considerable amount of time on Arianna's taste in men, the introduction of Elia Sand, a stand-in for Lyanna, and the movements of the Golden Company. All three of these will be explored further in Arianna II, which we will tackle next. We will see you next time with Arianna II, which surprisingly has a lot to do with the Children of the Forest. Thanks for watching.